Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Teresa J. Canada, and thank you for subscribing. Thank you for putting a thumbs up, and welcome to the next episode. So I apologize because, I'll be fading in and out until I can get an actual studio to do this in. But anyway, I just want to talk a little bit today about a topic that, I try to focus on things that's in the North, but I have a topic I want to, really kind of two topics. I'll just do one today and I'll do another one another day. But I want to talk basically about, in the North, there's two things I want to talk about. One, I want to talk about education, because many people don't realize, the emphasis in terms of, Black people going to schools and talking to someone basically was about the South, the big push in the South. But the same things were really pretty much happening in the North, which I attended. I go to school in New York City, so I talk about that in my book. But it's interesting, even though that, the process of quote unquote desegregation was taking place in the North, yes, it was also, more hostile in some cases in the South. But the key is this. The key is that what happens for those young people who choose to go beyond the elementary and secondary level in school? That's what I really want to kind of address today a little bit. Many of you know that, at least all I can understand, is that the HBCUs were the only schools where Black people could go to attend colleges. And HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Okay, that's what it stands for. If you didn't know it then before, you know it now. Okay, and there are certain schools, and they're pretty much all located in the South. Okay, there were never any quote HBCUs in the North. So that's very interesting. And part of that probably had a lot to do with the fact that a majority of Black people lived in the South, and that comes, from the enslavement of Black people in this country, and they were mostly in the South because the industries in the South were where they were put to work, and were picking cotton and picking, doing rice. I mean, all those things you need to understand. See, many people don't even know that. And of course, what happened years later was with the Great Migration to the North, and how that brought more Black people to the northern cities in the West, and also the West, California, and also the Midwest. Okay, so many of them left for better opportunities to get jobs outside of the actually working, quote unquote, in the field. So you need to understand that history first of all to understand. But when Blacks came to the North, they were in quote unquote segregated neighborhoods, and they were in the worst, the most undesirable neighborhoods, and the resources were limited. Not that much has changed, mind you. Okay, but the neighborhoods where they didn't provide the best resources. There weren't that many grocery stores. There weren't that many, places where people could do anything. The schools were not the best schools. The teachers who taught them most of the time weren't. But I'm gonna tell you something. I lived in Harlem. I grew up in Harlem. Okay, very unlike where it is today. But at the time, that was where a majority of Black people who lived in Manhattan lived in Harlem. Okay, and it wasn't just people. It wasn't just an economic thing. And if you go, I'm not going to spend this time today talking about it, but most of the people, because of the segregation that exists in housing, they live, entertainers, educators, they all, sports people, they all, look, what was his name? I think Willie Mays lived in Harlem when he played. I'm pretty sure. I got to go back and check, but I'm just saying. So even people who were well-known sports people who were basically part of that sports world also lived in Harlem. And entertainers and educators, and because there were middle-class people who lived in Harlem. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't unusual at all. But that was the idea, like Harlem was such a horrible place. But when I grew up, it was very diverse. Okay, when I grew up, now not. But as a matter of fact, I've seen the switch from not being somewhat diverse and having the variety of economic people living in Harlem who are Black. And then this train, of course, the change that occurred with the influx of the drugs into the communities. And I kind of see, like, I kind of look at the Vietnam War as a kind of turning point, really, if you ask me, because for how it impacted Harlem. That's just my intake. I could be wrong about that, but I recall that's what was happening because when many of the young men who came back, who lived in Harlem, who came back home, they were addicted to substance because at that point, and that's another topic. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but it's something to understand, to know about, because it did impact the communities, and it, of course, led to the quote unquote, drugs infested areas because it was brought into the communities. Because many of those guys came back addicted. Many of them came back because they were given apparently freely to keep them to cope in the Vietnam War, which wasn't a good thing. But then when they get back to the country, sorry, no more drugs for free. So, it led to an epidemic within the communities that we lived in. So let me go back to the education piece there. But see, there's so many interwoven issues that people don't know about. They need to know about. And if it happened in New York City, it happened in other cities as well. But this is the North. People have this idea that pretty much like Black people didn't exist in the North. And they did. Okay, they did. But much of that had to do with the great migration that happened. So people wanted to get out of the South and come up North and have opportunity to work in factory jobs and other kinds of jobs like that. So that's pretty much why they all mostly live in certain communities. So getting back to my topic related to why I'm talking about what happens with elementary, secondary, and those who choose or are able to go to college. There were no options for education beyond the secondary school in the North, all right, in terms of HBCUs. And that's where you could go to school, HBCUs. If you want to go to college, you had to go to HBCU. And if you didn't want to go to college, just did what you could do while you could do it. But if you did want to attend college to become, get a professional, degree, then you had to go south, right? So the young people who grew up in the North, who attended school, elementary and secondary school in the North, had no other choice but to go to an HBCU where they were located in the South. So my question to you then is this: why is it that you get education, you go to elementary school, secondary in the North, even though some of those schools were pretty much segregated in the North, okay? And then you go to the South to be able to attend college. Do you think that's the best thing? Well, that was the only option. Okay? That was the only choice that people had at that time. And it wasn't necessarily a bad choice because there were some excellent educators at those colleges, all right? Excellent, outstanding. And let me just tell you this story. I like to tell stories, right? Well, my brother attended an HBCU. Well, I have two siblings who attended HBCUs as undergraduates. And this is a really true story. I think I just mentioned to my brother recently. So I know you guys understand, you folks understand me now. I just kind of just talk off the hip, right? And I was just mentioning to my brother, I know when he was attending college, I recall to this day, he said to me what a professor, I don't know what class or anything he was in, I don't know if it was an English class. I don't know what kind of class it was in, but I just mentioned this to my brother recently. He started laughing when I mentioned it. He thought I had forgotten about it. This has been eons ago, right? So I remember, and this was very distinctive, and I don't recall, and I think, and this was a Black professor. Of course, as an HBCU, it was a Black professor, a Black male professor. And I think about how significant that is to young people who look like my brother and myself, to go to a college, to see a professor like that, and to have excellence. See, it's all about excellence. People think, has always been about excellence for people like me. But at least that's for my family. At least that's how I think. Because I'm going to tell you, my best teacher to this day, the best teacher I ever had was my third grade elementary school teacher. I'm not saying the best, but she was my first Black teacher. And I was in the third grade. And for a child who's 7 years old, and you see this, like really astute Black woman dressed apparently, not sloppily dressed at all, very, very well-mannered, but she was so strict. I guess I called it that, if she was strict. But I really admired that, okay? And you know why? Because we need to have role models who we can admire. And, that's very important. that we have role models that we can admire. And it allows us to perceive ourselves, say, well, if this person can do this, then I can do this. But when you don't have that, if that's lacking, that's another episode. We'll talk about role models later. But I'm just saying that was my elementary school teacher. That was my first Black teacher in elementary school, was in third grade. And I'll never forget her to this day. And I think that helped me to realize that if she could be in that position to be a teacher, then I could probably do something as well. But going back to the topic of HBCUs, I want to mention that this particular professor, so we talk about excellence, and this, of course, mostly Black students attend HBCUs. It's a given. So my brother told me the story about this professor who walked in the classroom. I think he has a briefcase. I mean, literally, step by step, he walks into the classroom. This is like from hearing from my brother. And as a matter of fact, I just spoke to him about this recently. And I said, do you remember that? You told me a story about this professor. He said, yeah, I remember that situation. He couldn't remember the professor's name, but he remembers the class. And the professor comes into the class. And my brother said the professor came into the class and he put his briefcase down on the table. And bear with me, everybody, when I tell you this. My brother said that the professor walked in, put his briefcase on the table, and he said to the class, I may be paraphrasing, but I think this is pretty much a direct quote. And the professor said to the students, there will be no I be, he be, she be spoken in this classroom. End of quote. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, right? And I was like blown away by this. And you talk about, that's excellence. So what this professor is saying is that he wants the young people to be able to speak correct grammar. That's what he's saying. Now, you can do your little side stuff if you want to. You can do your little, whatever. But he's saying to these Black students in this class at this HBCU, in his class, there will be no I be, he be, she be spoken in this classroom. What does that say? That says he expected excellence. He expected excellence from his students. And I know that the students must have fell out when they, couldn't believe this, but that's the kind of discipline and expectation that Black professors, probably the same thing with Black teachers, like my Black teacher in third grade, had of the students, and to be able to share with them, say, this is the expectation I have of you. And it's excellent. Now, you can go on the side and do your slang and whatever left, but in this classroom, this is how you're going to speak. You can't do anything but admire that. You cannot do anything but to admire that. Come on, folks. All right? So when you talk about education in the North, all right, you talk about it in the North, many people tended to speak more. It all depends upon where you grew up. If your parents spoke with a dialect, or, because some of us who are Caribbean ancestry, whatever, you hear some of that and you pick some of that up, and it's okay. But in certain environments, you are expected to speak in a certain way, in a certain manner. And you need to know that. So I think about what that teacher said to those students in this class. In this class, there will be no I be, he be, she be spoken in this classroom. That's what he's saying. Now, he's not saying you're not able to speak it outside, but he's setting a standard. A standard. But I believe because it was an HBCU, the expectations are even greater for the students in these classrooms. Shout out to HBCUs, okay? I'm just saying as a whole, but that was expectation. But as I said before, most Black students who went to school in the North, if they want to attend college, prior to, I don't know, I mean, you have a few far in between, but if you want to attend college, HBCU was the way to go. Okay, it was the way to go. Now I have two siblings who attend HBCUs. Out of the four of us, two of us attended. Okay, I mean, I didn't attend HBCU, but I wish I did. But I'm just saying that's another story too. But I chose to attend another institution, which worked out for me. But I'm not so sure it would have worked out for some other people. But I think that because of my exposure and what I learned and how I was able to deal with things when I lived in New York City, and the exposure I had prepared me to be able to do well in college at a predominantly white institution in the North, okay, in the North. So I'm just saying to you that what is it that you need to do to prepare students, okay, if they choose to go to college, all right? So the expectation is excellent still. So like I said, when I was, I grew up, educational excellence was basically a standard we have to base ourselves on. So but that's because of my surrounding and my expectation, what I was accustomed to. And to hear the experience that my brother went through when he went to the school, his college, and to hear a professor say that has resonated with me to this day. And it's been years that he's been in college, okay? And I think that that's important because he's setting a certain level of excellence for his students. And I think every education should do that, no matter what school, no matter what level, be it elementary or secondary, set a standard of excellence for your students. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Set a standard of excellence for all your students, okay? Not just some, but for all your students. That's what we need in this country. This is what we need in this world, all right? You take what you can while you can. Take it for whatever you can, okay? Take it from wherever you can. And just be the best that you can be. That was the expectation for me. And that's the expectation I have of the students that I've taught over the years. And they know it, all right? And I'm just saying, I have not wavered from that expectation. I've not wavered. And I think because I understood how it was for me growing up in New York City, going through the experience I had of being in a so-called desegregated experience, and also being able to not only survive, but thrive despite that. That says a lot. That says a lot. So it also says, when I heard about, my brother's situation with this professor, it doesn't stop there. So just like I had an excellent teacher in third grade elementary school, even in college situations, we have excellence there as well. Okay, a Black male teacher, excellence. Okay, and the expectation is excellence of the students. So you have to have the expectation that students are going to be excellent when you step foot in that classroom. So as I prepare, when I prepared a lot of students who became teachers and beyond, that was my expectation for them, to be excellent in their roles, what they plan to do in education. So that's my topic for today. And, I wanted to thank you for listening. And, put a thumbs up, subscribe. Let me hear your thoughts about this topic and what you went through. And if you think about the difference about elementary and secondary education in the North and having to go in a Southern school, HBCU, to be able to go to college. Or was it a different experience in a private, in the North, which it probably was. But if you bring the excellence if you had the excellence early on, which I did, I had it early on. So I didn't have to worry about where I went after that. So it was embedded already as a young child, that excellence was the way to go. And that's something we need to do now more of. And especially for children who look like me or don't look like me. Everybody should have that attitude. So I'm just saying to you, that was what I wanted to share with you today about education in terms of, going from elementary and secondary in the North and then having to go to the South to go to college to be able to get a college education and experiences one has. But it all goes back to educational excellence. All right. And I'll talk another day about the topic of educational excellence and what it is and does it matter. All right. Until then, we'll see you next time. Enjoy your day, night, evening, weekend, wherever you are around the city, around the state, around the country, around the world. We'll see you next time at another episode of the Silk Stockings Sisters podcast. Have a great one, everyone. And thanks. Bye.